On the vast grasslands of Kruger National Park in South Africa, the morning sun spreads evenly over the misty haze, making the scene even more magical and peaceful. Passing through sparse trees and lush green bushes, Wandile, a young conservation officer, begins his daily patrol with a passionate heart and a deep love for nature. Since he was a child, he has cherished the dream of dedicating himself to protecting the wild world. And now Kruger National Park is the place to make that dream come true. Every time he sets out, he carefully checks his off-road vehicle, ensuring he has enough water, medicine, and spare medical equipment to respond promptly to any emergency situation. Along the way, he often stops to observe footprints on the ground, listen to the calls of birds, feel every breath of the earth and sky, and learn about the mysterious lives of all species. It was on such an early morning, in the quiet space, that he suddenly noticed a small bloodstain on the dry grassland, causing a premonition of danger to rise in his heart. He stopped the car and quietly got out, tiptoed along the drops of blood that had soaked into the weeds, wondering anxiously what kind of animal was injured and needed help. After walking a short distance, he saw the majestic body of a male lion lying motionless, its golden fur stained with dried blood, tightly wrapped in sharp barbed wire. His heart pounding at the heartbreaking sight, Wandile approached very carefully, holding the medical kit in his hand. Trying to stay calm so as not to frighten the lion, the cowardly lion growled softly, looked up at him with lost eyes, then seemed exhausted and lowered its head again, desperate and helpless before the barbed wire dug deep into its flesh. Wandile quickly examined the wound, noticing that the wire had wrapped tightly around the animal's shoulders and back, causing several bloody cuts that required skillful and patient intervention. He knelt down, pulled out a pair of pliers from his tool bag, took a deep breath, and began to cut away the steel, trying to calm the lion as he worked so that it would not rise up in fear. Sweat poured down his forehead and fell onto the dry grass, but he did not allow himself to stop, for the life of the king of the jungle was in his hands. The tense moments passed slowly. The sound of the pliers cutting the steel rang out, mixed with the soft, painful groans of the wounded animal. When the last wire was removed, Wandile urgently applied antiseptic and a temporary bandage to limit infection. Despite the seriousness of the wound, the male lion, after escaping the barbed wire, was still breathing heavily, trembling with fatigue, but his eyes began to show relief and gratitude. Wandile said a few soft words, naming it Jabari, which means brave in the local language, to commemorate this extraordinary moment. Carefully stepping back, he gave Jabari some space, observing whether it could stand up on its own after such serious injuries. Slowly, the lion lifted itself up, staggered a few steps, then looked deeply into Wandile's eyes, as if wanting to remember the image of its savior. Under the early morning sunlight, Jabari turned and walked into the tall grass, leaving behind the shredded barbed wire along with traces of blood still imprinted on the ground. That moment touched Wandile's heart, making him deeply aware of his mission to protect and accompany all living beings in this wild. A few weeks passed and life returned to a steady rhythm. Wandile continued his patrols in his old off-road vehicle, wandering across the vast grasslands. One afternoon when the sky was clear and calm, he caught a glimpse of a familiar figure in the distance watching him across the golden grasslands. It was Jabari, the male lion he had saved, now somewhat recovered, quietly hiding behind the bushes, observing his every move with a calm gaze without any sign of threat. It simply followed, keeping a distance that would not cause uneasiness, as if to say that it had not forgotten the human friend who had saved its life. From that day on, Wandile was never truly alone on his patrols, for Jabari was often seen from somewhere, silently protecting him. Colleagues in the park began to stir when many reported seeing a large lion following Wandile's car on the red dirt roads. At first, everyone was worried because no one knew if it was a potential threat, but Wandile smiled and said that Jabari was not a threat, but a friend. As time passed, everyone witnessed Jabari just quietly following, never showing any signs of attack, and it seemed to have a special bond with Wandile. Once he stopped the car in the tall grass to check the traces of an antelope herd. Jabari also stopped from a distance, patiently observing until he got back in the car and continued driving, then it slowly followed. This friendship between species spread throughout the park, making many visitors curious to learn more. And everyone was secretly happy to see the conservationist's kindness reciprocated by nature. People began to call Jabari the wild guard of Wandile, admiring the magical bond between man and the king of the jungle. One sunset, after finishing his work, Wandile suddenly realized that Jabari was sitting on a high rock, looking at him as if waiting to send him home. The scene was so beautiful and sacred when the two exchanged trust. Wandile's figure disappeared behind the long dirt road, and Jabari returned to his wild world. However, an incident occurred during a harsh dry season when a herd of angry wild elephants swept through the western part of the national park, destroying many trees and infrastructure. They seemed to have lost control due to the hot weather, scarce water, and lack of food, making their behavior more aggressive and unusual than usual. The National Park Management ordered the evacuation of tourists camping near the elephant herd, and Wandile immediately set out, determined to escort everyone to safety. Along the way, the roars of the elephants resounded loudly, drowning out the sound of the engines, making everyone's hearts tremble with fear and worry for everyone's safety. While hastily coordinating the group of tourists, Wandile accidentally got separated from his teammates. Stuck on a low mound surrounded by only reeds and a few broken tree stumps, the sound of the elephant's footsteps grew closer and closer. The ground seemed to shake under their terrible power, making him not know where to hide. Just when he was desperate, he heard a loud roar ringing in his ears, causing the elephants to stop for a moment. There was no mistaking it. It was Jabari. The majestic lion charged forward like an arrow, exuding the majestic aura of the king of the jungle. Jabari chose to attract the elephants' attention with his continuous roars, standing in front of them and baring his fangs threateningly, despite the risk of being attacked by their sharp tusks and massive bodies. The elephants turned toward Jabari, roaring in defiance, but the lion did not retreat, trying to buy time for Wandile to find a way to retreat. Both frightened and respectful, Wandile took advantage of that moment to run toward a high cliff, away from the path of the angry elephants. Meanwhile, Jabari was still majestically blocking the way, moving skillfully between the giant legs, sometimes leaning to avoid when the elephants swung their trunks, sometimes roaring to intimidate the invaders of his territory. Even though he knew he could get hurt or worse, Jabari still kept his distance from the elephants, preventing them from approaching Wandile. The elephants' roars and the lion's roars created a chaotic symphony echoing across the field, shaking the normally quiet space of the dry forest. The elephants gradually noticed the strange appearance of the fierce and brave lion. Perhaps they were also tired after many hours of running, so they slowly turned in another direction. When the last elephant disappeared, Jabari collapsed and gasped, clearly exhausted from the tense confrontation just now. Wandile rushed to Jabari's side, his eyes flashing with sincere concern for his special companion, and at the same time, he was moved to realize that his life had just been saved. Placing a trembling hand on the lion's mane, he whispered words of gratitude, feeling the king of the jungle's heart beating rapidly with exhaustion. Fortunately, Jabari was not seriously injured, only bruised and tired, but the situation that had just happened proved that he had risked his life to protect Wandile. After the elephants left, Wandile was able to contact his teammates. He carried Jabari into the car, slowly drove to the field veterinary station to check the wound, his heart filled with gratitude. The whole reserve was excited by the news of the lion saving the person. Everyone was amazed at the loyalty and bravery that Jabari showed in sacrificing himself to help his benefactor. The National Park Management Board considered this a historical mark, recognizing the rare bond between humans and the iconic wild animals of this place. Jabari was cared for a few days, gradually recovering. Although still weak, he still looked toward Wandile every time he approached, as if to affirm that their friendship would never change. After the incident, Wandile cherished the male lion even more because not only did he save it, but it also used its whole heart to repay him. On tourist information pages, people passed on the story of the conservationist and the guardian lion, seeing it as living proof of the magical bond. Tourists who had the opportunity to visit Kruger were curious to meet this couple, taking rare photos of the relationship that transcends the boundaries of species. When Jabari was healed, he returned to his territory, but still kept an eye on the familiar figure, ready to appear whenever Wandile needed him. On every patrol, Wandile could feel Jabari's silent presence somewhere, like a silent guard of the vast grasslands. Memories of fighting together in times of danger, of the barbed wire that had been shredded, now became beautiful marks between man and lion. Sitting by the campfire on windy nights, the conservation staff often mentioned the courageous journey of Wandile and Jabari, like a fairy tale in the middle of the jungle. When dawn broke, he set off again in his familiar car, carrying the belief that despite the hardships waiting, he was not alone because a loyal friend was always lurking somewhere. The morning grasslands were covered in a thin layer of mist, reflecting the silhouettes of Wandil in the car, while somewhere Jabari walked lightly on the damp grass, keeping his eyes on his human friend. They were symbols of kindness and mutual understanding, different species but still in tune with the language of sharing and loyalty. That pride spread throughout the national park, inspiring those who believed in kindness and the ability to blur the lines between humans and nature. Every time he finished work, when the sky was red at sunset, Wandil would glance into the distance, hoping to find the shadow of the lion, like a daily farewell ritual between the two friends. One day he saw Jabari sitting majestically on a rock, watching him until he left the campus, then leisurely returned to his pride. The story of Wandile and Jabari has inspired generations of conservationists, encouraging them to work hard for the safety of wildlife. Although the world outside is still full of difficulties, in Kruger, this friendship across species continues to grow as a testament to the fact that wild instincts can be harmonized with kindness. Throughout his journey, Wandley always reminds himself to keep an open heart because one day we can find magical teammates in nature. The scars on Jabari's shoulders, the remaining traces of barbed wire, have now become symbols of faith and gratitude, connecting the fates of two creatures that seemed impossible to be close. Through each rainy and sunny season, when the grasslands change their colors, Jabari and Wandil still occasionally meet, sharing wonderful quiet moments. He never forgot the moment he first touched the lion's mane, between fear and love, when it was his courage that guided him to do what seemed impossible. On the gravel roads covered with the footprints of herbivores, people sometimes saw Jabari's bright yellow eyes following Wandil's figure quietly and warmly. The memory of the ferocious elephant herd years ago reminded him of the moment of life and death, of the great sacrifice that Jabari made for him, giving him more motivation to continue the path of conservation. Everyone was amazed and applauded every time they heard about the time the lion saved a person, and they admired even more the young employee's kindness and extraordinary courage. From then on, whenever he heard the familiar roar, his heart would beat faster, as if there was an invisible thread connecting two souls, even though they were not of the same species. One evening, when the work was done, Wandile recalled the long journey with Jabari, feeling the simple and profound happiness that nature bestowed. He still believed that in every blade of grass swaying in the wind, in every cloud floating in the sky, Jabari was always present, watching and protecting in its own way. That's why he continued to move forward, continuing to cherish every life in Kruger National Park because he knew he was no longer alone. Like a beautiful anecdote, their story resonated far and wide across all borders, making many people realize that amidst danger, love and compassion can still shine. When the new day came, Wandil was ready for the next journey, carrying with him gratitude for life and a warm smile, waiting for the opportunity to reunite with Jabari on the endless grassland. Amidst the majestic natural scenery, he looked toward the horizon where the first rays of sunlight were filtering through the clouds, and knew for sure that somewhere Jabari was also watching over him. The seemingly harsh, wild world still has miracles, such as the extraordinary friendship that humans and the king of the jungle have for each other. And day by day, they continued to write the story of courage, sincerity, and beautiful love, warming the hearts of many travelers when coming to Kruger. After all, Wandile understood that sometimes just one act of kindness is enough to create a miracle, and he proved it in his own life. Whenever he remembered the day of rescuing the lion, he could not forget Jabari's grateful eyes and could not have imagined that from that moment, they would become two soulmates who crossed all boundaries. He smiled as he closed each day, thinking of the roar that echoed somewhere in the night, signaling that Jabari was safe and sound, keeping their sacred bond in the wild. Dear friend, thank you for taking the time to follow the story. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to support us.